This is a free course. No fluff, no nonsense. A direct and deep dive into the most powerful concepts of Carl Jung's psychology, with a clear goal to help you master your shadow and become emotionally unshakable. Who should watch until the end? Anyone facing anxiety, depression, feelings of guilt, anger, grief, or any type of psychological suffering. Those who already realize they are stuck, repeating self-destructive behavior patterns. Those who feel that no matter how hard they try, they cannot achieve the emotional control they desire. Those who carry pains they cannot name, but that weigh on them every day. This content is for you. Throughout this video, you will clearly and practically understand what the shadow is. You will learn how it silently shapes your feelings, thoughts, and impulses. You will discover why so many of the emotions you cannot control, outbursts of anger, anxiety attacks, unexplained sadness, chronic guilt, do not arise from external situations, but from unresolved conflicts within you. And more importantly, you will learn how to face all of this, not with superficial positive thinking techniques, but with a real, deep, and transformative method. A method based on over a century of deep psychology, teaching you to confront the most hidden parts of your psyche and integrate them. This is not a video for passive consumption. Pause when necessary. Take notes. Go back and watch again. Each concept presented here can change the way you understand yourself and how you deal with the world, but only if you apply it. It's not enough to just watch. It's personal work that requires courage. And yes, it will require discomfort. But on the other side of that discomfort is the emotional freedom you seek. You will learn why the repression of the shadow is at the root of many psychological disorders. How the persona, the mask you show to the world, contributes to your emotional fragility. How the archetypes of the collective unconscious manifest in your daily life, and how all this knowledge can be transformed into practical action. This is a complete course, a solid foundation for anyone wishing to start or deepen the process of individuation. The path that Jung described as the true purpose of human life, to become who you are. Now, if you really want to free yourself from the psychological suffering that accompanies you, if you want to be someone who can navigate the most difficult emotions without being destroyed by them, you are in the right place. But remember, only those who watch until the end and practice what is taught here will achieve real results. Let's get started. The shadow. This is the name that Carl Jung gave to the set of everything you reject, repress, or simply refuse to acknowledge in yourself. And this is where we truly begin this course. Understanding what the shadow is and why it exerts such a devastating power over your emotional life. Imagine the following. Since childhood, you have been taught, by your parents, by school, by society, about what is acceptable and what is not. You were praised when you were nice, polite, obedient. You were criticized or punished when you showed anger, envy, selfishness, deep sadness, impulses considered ugly or wrong. And, like every child, you quickly learned. Certain emotions and behaviors need to be hidden, pushed into a dark corner of your psyche. This is how the shadow is born. But what happens to everything that has been repressed? It does not disappear. On the contrary, it remains alive, growing in the unconscious, shaping your reactions, your thoughts, your feelings. The shadow is the sum of all these denied aspects of the personality. It is the dark side that you do not want to see, but that inevitably acts upon you. Anxiety, often an indirect manifestation of the shadow. Depression, a buildup of unprocessed emotions trapped in the darkness of the psyche. Explosive anger, the cry of repressed parts that can no longer be ignored. Self-sabotage, an internal attack from the shadow itself against the conscious goals of the ego. The shadow is not evil in itself. It contains aspects that could in fact be sources of strength and creativity if integrated in a healthy way. But as long as it is not recognized, the shadow will continue to operate autonomously. And that is why so many people live trapped in cycles of emotional suffering that they cannot explain. They feel overwhelmed by uncontrollable emotions, by self-destructive impulses, by patterns of behavior that repeat like an endless nightmare. And here is the truth that few have the courage to face. You are not just the image you have built of yourself. Persona, your social mask, built to please, to protect, to fit in, ends up reinforcing the dominance of the shadow. Now pay close attention, because this is important. If you've made it this far, you're probably asking yourself, how can I actually apply all of this in my life? Because knowing, just knowing, changes nothing. What transforms you is practice. And that's exactly why I created my new ebook, Dialogues with the Unconscious, a 30-day path to individuation. This is not an ebook to just read and forget. It's a 30-day practical guide with simple yet powerful daily exercises that you can do in just a few minutes each day. You don't need hours of free time. You just need daily commitment. Every exercise is designed to help you connect with your unconscious and start integrating your shadow in a consistent, practical way. And this ebook is the perfect complement for those who have read or will read Beyond the Shadow. If Beyond the Shadow is the map, Dialogues is the day-by-day path to help you apply this knowledge in real life. And listen, it's currently available with a 10% launch discount, but that won't last long. If you're truly committed to doing this work, don't put it off. Click the link in the pinned comment and get your copy right now. Start your practical journey of transformation today. To understand how the shadow maintains control over your life, it is essential to comprehend the role of the persona, the social mask you have built to survive and adapt to the world. Jung describes the persona as a system of adaptation or relationship with the external world. In other words, it is the image you present to be accepted, respected, or loved. It is not who you truly are, but who you have learned to appear to be. Since childhood, you notice that certain behaviors generate approval, while others lead to punishment or rejection. Naturally, you learn to emphasize the pleasing aspects and hide those that are not. Over time, this adaptation crystallizes. You wear the persona like armor, an idealized version of yourself that you carry into relationships, work, and social life. But here lies the problem. Everything you repress to maintain this mask ends up being pushed into the shadow. The more rigid and perfect the persona, the more psychic material accumulates in the darkness of the unconscious. Therefore, people who seem extremely controlled, always positive, and impeccable in public often struggle in secret with deep states of anxiety, depression, explosive anger, or a suffocating sense of emptiness. The price of sustaining an idealized persona is extremely high. In Modern Man in Search of a Soul, Jung warns, the persona is a compromise with society, but also a self-deception, as it distances us from what we truly are. The more you believe you are your persona, the more disconnected you become from your authentic self, and the more vulnerable you are to the manipulations of the shadow. This internal conflict generates constant emotional fatigue. You expend energy trying to maintain an artificial image while repressed aspects of the psyche demand attention. It is a game that cannot be won. The shadow will always find ways to manifest, whether through physical symptoms, emotional crises, or impulsive behaviors. The solution? Start dismantling that mask. Recognize that you are not the persona. You are a whole human being with lights and shadows. Integrating these aspects is the only way to achieve true emotional freedom. And the first step toward that is learning to identify the elements of your shadow. How does it manifest in your daily life? How can you begin to notice your hidden patterns? This is exactly what you will discover in the next part. Now that you understand how the shadow and the persona interact, it's time to take a crucial step, learning to recognize your shadow in everyday life. Jung made it clear that the shadow reveals itself whenever we are dominated by intense and irrational emotions. In Ion, he writes, "The shadow appears in impulsive reactions, in lapses of behavior, in the projections we make onto others." In other words, you don't need to enter a cave to find the shadow. Just pay attention to your own daily reactions. Here are some practical examples. Imagine you feel a sudden and disproportionate hatred for someone at work. Something small, a comment, a gesture, triggers a rage that you yourself consider exaggerated. This is a clear sign of projection. What you're hating in that other person is, in fact, a repressed aspect of yourself that you refuse to accept. Another example. You disdainfully judge people who show emotional vulnerability, saying they are weak or dramatic. But if you look deeper, you might realize that you yourself have repressed your sensitivity for years, out of fear of being seen as weak. What you condemn in others is what you cannot tolerate recognizing in yourself. Situations like envying someone's success, feeling excessive guilt for small mistakes, having outbursts of jealousy, chronic procrastination, or avoiding important confrontations, all of these can be expressions of the shadow. In Man and His Symbols, Jung and his collaborators emphasize that dreams are one of the most direct ways to access shadow content. Recurring dreams with situations of loss of control, being chased, confrontations with shadowy figures or aggressive animals usually indicate that repressed content is trying to emerge. Another indicator: pay attention to your body. Chronic tension, unexplained pain, constant fatigue, these symptoms often reflect the psychic energy blocked by the attempt to keep shadowy aspects out of consciousness. Therefore, the key to recognizing your shadow is honest self-observation. Ask yourself, what irrationally bothers me in others? What emotions dominate me against my will? What behaviors do I feel ashamed of after they happen? What parts of myself do I hide to maintain my social image? This work requires courage. It is not comfortable to admit that you have anger, envy, fear, or cruelty within you. But as long as you do not recognize these elements, you will continue to be controlled by them. However, identifying the shadow is just the beginning. The next step, and the most challenging, is to consciously confront it. And for that, it is essential to understand how the process of confronting the shadow works, which you will discover in the next part. Recognizing the shadow is an essential first step, but true transformation happens in the confrontation. And here, Jung was categorical. There is no way to avoid integrating the shadow. These archetypes frequently emerge in dreams, emotional projections, and relationships. Practical example: a man in the process of individuation begins to have recurring dreams with mysterious feminine figures, seductive, dangerous, or wise. These images represent the anima inviting him to integrate repressed emotional aspects. The same occurs with women regarding the animus, which may appear in dominating or inspiring masculine figures. Self. The archetype of the self represents the psychic totality, the organizing center of the psyche that transcends the ego. When the self emerges, there is usually a strong impulse to integrate internal polarities. But the self also confronts you with everything that has been denied, demanding conscious balance. Practical example: after months of working with the shadow, you begin to feel a new sense of internal unity and coherence. However, this comes accompanied by deep existential crises, questions about purpose, values, and identity. This is the self in action, forcing an internal reorganization. Trickster. Perhaps the most treacherous of the archetypes in this process is the trickster, the archetype of deception, chaos, and rule-breaking. On the path of individuation, the trickster often emerges when you believe you have overcome aspects of the shadow. It tests your ego, creating emotional traps and illusions of superiority. Practical example. After a period of significant progress, you start to think of yourself as more awakened or aware than others, and ironically, fall into a new form of self-deception. The trickster is at work, inflating the ego and obscuring the true inner work. In Ion, Jung emphasizes that archetypes are not contents of consciousness, but factors that organize and structure the psyche. Recognizing their presence and role is crucial for navigating the individuation process with clarity. Integrating the shadow is neither a linear nor simple journey. With each step, these archetypes emerge to guide, test, and transform you. Knowing how to identify them and engage in dialogue with them is one of the most important skills you can develop. But why is it worth facing all of this? Because the result of this work is a radical transformation in your emotional strength. In the next part, you will understand how the integration of the shadow strengthens your emotional intelligence and why those who undergo this process become truly emotionally unshakable. After everything you've seen so far, it's natural to ask, why go through the hard work of integrating the shadow? The answer is simple, because the result is a profound transformation of your emotional intelligence and your ability to deal with life. Carl Jung made this clear in The Undiscovered Self. No transformation of consciousness can occur without parts of the unconscious, primarily the shadow, being brought to light. In other words, you do not achieve true emotional maturity until you face and integrate your shadow. But what does this mean in practice? Imagine someone who has spent their entire life struggling with outbursts of anger. After integrating the shadow, this person does not become a passive or indifferent being. On the contrary, they begin to recognize anger as a legitimate emotion, learning to express it consciously and proportionately. This makes them emotionally stronger, more whole. Another example, a person with a tendency towards social anxiety. Before working on the shadow, they avoided social situations, paralyzed by an irrational fear of judgment. By integrating the shadow aspects related to insecurity and the need for approval, they gradually begin to expose themselves to these situations with a new sense of self-confidence. These changes happen because by integrating the shadow, you reclaim parts of the psyche that were dissociated. This releases psychic energy that was previously consumed in repression. As a result, you become more authentic. You begin to act in a way that is more congruent with who you really are, and not just to maintain a persona. More emotionally resilient. Intense emotions no longer dominate you because you recognize them as legitimate parts of your being. Less reactive. By recognizing your own triggers, you stop projecting onto others what is yours. More whole. You accept yourself as a complete human being, with lights and shadows, which generates a profound sense of inner peace. In Modern Man in Search of a Soul, Jung writes, "The acceptance of the dark side of oneself strengthens the individual as they begin to relate more honestly and consciously to life." People who reach this level of integration become emotionally unshakable, not because they no longer feel difficult emotions, but because they are no longer controlled by them. They live with a sense of presence and stability that is rare in a world where most still flee from their own shadow. But how to apply this in everyday life? How to train your perception to keep the shadow integrated in daily life without falling back into old patterns. This will be the focus of the next part. Practical applications to cultivate a constant and deep state of awareness. Integrating the shadow is not a one-time event. There is no endpoint where you can say, okay, I'm done. Integration is a continuous process, and the real challenge is to keep that awareness alive in your daily life. How can you do this practically? First, it is essential to cultivate a posture of constant self-observation. In Psychology of the Unconscious, Jung writes that what is not brought to consciousness continues to happen as fate. This means you must train your perception to identify the moments when shadowy content tries to emerge, in feelings of irritation, envy, fear, and self-sabotage. Here are concrete practices you can adopt. 1. Conscious internal dialogue. Start paying attention to your automatic reactions. When you feel anger, envy, or shame, instead of repressing them, engage in an internal dialogue with these feelings. Ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to show me about myself? 2. Reflective writing. Set aside a few minutes each day to write about situations that provoked intense emotional reactions. By writing, you create a safe space to examine the contents of the shadow and reduce its unconscious power. 3. Dream analysis. As Jung emphasized in Man and His Symbols, dreams are direct gateways to the unconscious. Keep a dream journal. Observe recurring images, symbols, and characters that evoke strong emotions. These are valuable signs of what the shadow wants to reveal. 4. Mindfulness. Mindfulness practices help develop present moment awareness, allowing you to observe your own patterns without identifying with them. This creates a space between impulse and reaction, which is essential for shadow integration. 5. Working with